My name is Eleanor Brooks, and the moment my husband told me I had to serve his mother or leave our home, I felt something inside me go quiet, like a switch flipping off. I remember the way the kitchen clock kept ticking, loud and steady, while his words hung in the air. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I smiled, and that scared him more than shouting ever could. It happened on a Tuesday evening, the kind of ordinary night that makes betrayal feel even colder. Meatloaf was still warm on the stove. The mail sat unopened by the door. His mother, Ruth, was seated at the table, hands folded, like she was waiting for a verdict. My husband, Thomas, stood across from me, with his jaw-set eyes avoiding mine. He'd rehearsed this. I could tell. "Either you serve my mother," he said, voice calm but firm, "or you leave." Serve. That was the word he chose. Not help, not care for. Serve. I've been married to Thomas for 32 years. We raised 2 children, buried my father together, paid off this house board by board. I worked part-time at the library, even after retirement age, mostly because I loved the quiet order of it. I cooked, I cleaned, I showed up. But when his mother's arthritis worsened and she moved in for a few months, everything shifted. Suddenly, my days revolved around her schedule, her preferences, her complaints. If the soup wasn't salted right, it was my fault. If she missed a doctor's appointment, I was careless. Thomas never corrected her. He just expected me to absorb it. That night, Ruth didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her presence was the punctuation at the end of his sentence. I looked at Thomas and saw a man who decided my role without asking me if I agreed. I thought of all the little moments I'd swallowed my pride, bringing her breakfast in bed, canceling lunches with friends, listening to her criticize my cooking, as if I were a hired hand. I realized this wasn't about caregiving. It was about control. "I understand," I said quietly. Thomas blinked. He expected tears, negotiation, maybe a promise to do better. Instead, I turned off the stove, rinsed my hands, and walked down the hallway to our bedroom. I packed a small suitcase, clothes for a week, my medications, the photo of my mother I kept by the bed. I left the rest exactly where it was. I didn't slam drawers. I didn't rush. When I came back through the kitchen, Thomas was still standing there. Ruth finally looked up, startled. "Where are you going?" he asked. "I'm leaving," I said. "You gave me the choice." He followed me to the door. "Eleanor, don't be dramatic." I smiled again softly, this time. This isn't drama. This is dignity. I drove to a modest extended-stay motel near the edge of town. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and quiet. The clerk didn't ask questions. That night, I slept better than I had in months. The next morning, I woke up early and made myself coffee in the tiny kitchenette. I sat by the window and watched the sun climb over the parking lot. For the first time in a long while, the day belonged to me. Thomas called twice that morning. I didn't answer. Over the next few days, the calls came more often. Voicemails shifted in tone, from irritation to confusion to something close to panic. I listened to them once, then stopped. I needed the silence. Silence, I learned, can be a form of truth. I went to the library and volunteered a few hours like I used to. I attended a senior center workshop on managing retirement finances. I spoke to a legal aid volunteer who explained my rights calmly and clearly. No one told me I had to serve anyone to earn my place in the world. By the end of the week, my phone showed 18 missed calls. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt steady. Because leaving wasn't revenge. It was the beginning of something else, something honest. And I knew even then that if Thomas wanted me back, it would be on different terms. Terms that recognized I was a wife, not a servant, a partner, not a placeholder. The clock was ticking again, but this time it wasn't counting me down. It was counting me forward. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. Not my sister, not my children, not even my church friends. I needed those first days to be mine, untouched by advice or worry. The motel room became my quiet harbor. Beige walls, a small table, the hum of the air conditioner, like steady breathing. I made the bed each morning out of habit, then laughed softly at myself for it. Some things run deep. On the second day, I returned to the house, while Thomas and his mother were at a doctor's appointment. I wasn't sneaking. I still had a key. I moved slowly, deliberately, as if I were visiting a place that used to belong to me. I gathered documents, first birth certificate, marriage license, insurance cards. Then, my winter coat from the hall closet, the one Ruth always complained, took up too much space. I left the rest. I wasn't erasing my life. I was reclaiming it. I found a folded note on the kitchen counter in Thomas's handwriting. It said, "We need to talk. No apology, no question. Just a statement like always." I set it back down where it was and locked the door behind me. That afternoon, I sat in my car outside the grocery store and realized I was hungry. Not the dull hunger of routine meals, but the sharp kind that reminds you you're alive. I bought a small rotisserie chicken and a bag of salad, nothing fancy. Back at the motel, I ate at the table by the window and watched people come and go. I felt invisible in the best possible way. The phone rang again that evening. I let it go to voicemail. Thomas's voice was tight. "Eleanor, this has gone far enough. Mom can't manage on her own. I need you to come back." Need, not want. I didn't delete the message. I didn't save it either. On day 3, I attended a free seminar at the Senior Center, Know Your Rights Marriage, Money and Caregiving. I almost didn't go. It felt too official, too final. But the speaker, a calm woman with silver hair and sensible shoes, spoke plainly. She talked about consent, shared responsibility, and the difference between helping family and being forced into unpaid labor. I took notes. I asked questions. I felt something settle inside me, like a spine straightening. After the seminar, I spoke with a legal aid volunteer. She explained that the small inheritance my aunt left me years ago, money Thomas never wanted to discuss, was still mine, solely mine. She suggested I review our joint accounts and consider setting boundaries before emotions made decisions for me. I thanked her and felt no guilt at all. That night, I changed my phone settings. I didn't block Thomas. I just silenced the calls. The quiet was a choice. By day 5, the voicemails had shifted again. "Please," he said in one, "I can't do this alone." In another, his voice cracked. "She fell last night. She's okay, but, Eleanor, I don't know what I'm doing." I sat on the edge of the bed and held the phone in my hand for a long time. Compassion tugged at me, sharp and familiar. But I remembered the word he used, serve. I remembered how easily he'd placed me beneath both of them. I went for a walk instead. The park near the motel had a loop trail with benches every few hundred feet. I walked, slowly breathing in the fall air, watching leaves skitter across the path. An older man nodded hello as he passed. A woman about my age waved from a bench. Ordinary kindness, freely given. On the 7th day, I woke to 17 missed calls and one text, "Please come home." I showered, dressed neatly, and sat down with a notebook. I wrote a short list: what I would accept, what I would not. I wrote it calmly, without anger. I didn't know yet whether I would return, but I knew this much: if I did, it would not be as a servant. That afternoon, I sent Thomas a message of my own. "We can talk," I wrote, "but not at the house, and not without clear boundaries." He replied almost immediately, "Okay." That single word told me more than all the voicemails combined. I looked at my phone. 18 missed calls now. I didn't feel powerful. I felt prepared. Leaving without a scene had given me space. Space had given me clarity, and clarity, I was learning, is the quietest form of strength. The first night, I silenced my phone completely. I expected to feel anxious. I thought I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering if something terrible was happening back at the house. Instead, I slept straight through until morning. When I woke, the light coming through the thin motel curtains felt almost gentle, as if the day itself wasn't asking anything of me. I made coffee and sat at the small table, notebook, open pen resting in my hand. I didn't write right away. I just listened to the quiet. Silence, I was discovering, had layers. At first, it was empty. Then, it became spacious. Finally, it began to speak. By mid-morning, I checked my phone. 6 missed calls since midnight. I didn't listen to the messages. I didn't need to. I already knew what they would say. Confusion, frustration, fear, all the feelings Thomas had been spared, while I absorbed everything for years. I drove to the senior center that afternoon, the same one where I'd attended the seminar. Wednesdays were open lunch days. The room smelled like soup and coffee, and the noise level was just right, conversation without chaos. I recognized a few faces from the workshop. No one asked questions. No one pried. They just made room. I sat across from a woman named Marlene, widowed, a few years older than me. She talked about her garden and her grandson's baseball games. Ordinary things. Healing things. At one point, she looked at me and said, "You look lighter." I laughed. "I feel quieter." She nodded like she understood exactly what that meant. That evening, curiosity got the better of me, and I listened to one voicemail. Thomas sounded exhausted. "Mom keeps asking where you are," he said. "She won't eat what I make. She says, you know how she likes it. Eleanor." I didn't mean for this to turn into... His voice trailed off. I turned the phone face down. For the first time, he was experiencing the weight of the expectations he'd handed to me so easily. Not as punishment, but as reality. On Thursday, I logged into our joint bank account. I hadn't touched it in years. Beyond groceries and bills, I noticed something I'd never seen before. Several small withdrawals, regular marked cash. They lined up with Ruth's move-in. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, but enough to tell me how quietly my labor had been converted into assumption. I transferred nothing. I changed nothing. I simply printed the statements and placed them in a folder. That night, Thomas sent a longer text. "I'm not managing well. I took time off work. The nurse said we need help. I didn't realize how much you were doing." Didn't realize. I typed a response, then deleted it. Typed again, deleted again. Finally, I wrote, "I'm glad you're seeing it now." No accusation, just truth. The next day, I attended the library's book club, my old group. I hadn't told them what was happening. I just said I was staying nearby for a bit. We discussed a novel about a woman who outlived her usefulness in everyone's eyes except her own. When it was my turn to speak, my voice didn't shake. "I think we underestimate how dangerous that idea is," I said. that someone's value depends on what they provide. A few heads nodded. No one interrupted. Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with a different kind of message. My daughter Claire, Dad says you're upset. Are you okay? I closed my eyes and breathed. Then I called her. I told her I was safe, that I loved her, that I'd explain more later. I didn't want my children turned into messengers or referees. This wasn't their burden. By Sunday evening, the missed calls had slowed. 2 that day. 1 voicemail. Thomas sounded calmer, steadier. We hired a home health aide to come 3 mornings a week, he said. I should have done that sooner. I'm sorry. I listened to that one twice. The silence had done what arguing never could. It had made space for consequences to unfold without me orchestrating them. On Monday, I returned to the senior center, this time, for a legal clinic. I sat with a volunteer attorney who reviewed my notes and documents. She spoke plainly, without drama. You're not obligated to provide care, she said, and any reconciliation should be on mutually agreed terms. Mutually agreed. The phrase felt like a key turning in a lock. That night, Thomas called once. I let it ring. Then he texted, I'm ready to talk. Really talk. I looked at my notebook, at my list, at the quiet room that had become my refuge. Silence had given me leverage, not because it was manipulative, but because it was honest. It forced the truth to surface on its own. And I knew now that when we did talk, it wouldn't be about ultimatums. It would be about respect. By the time I agreed to meet Thomas, the panic in his voice had softened into something closer to humility. We chose a neutral place, a small conference room at the community center, the kind usually reserved for tax help or grief support groups. The tables were plain, the chairs mismatched. Nothing about the room carried the weight of our marriage, and that felt intentional. I arrived early and sat with my folder on the table in front of me. Inside were bank statements, notes from the legal clinic, and my handwritten list. I wasn't there to threaten. I was there to be clear. Thomas walked in 10 minutes late. Shoulders slumped, eyes tired. He looked older than he had a month ago. Not dramatically, so just worn in a way that comes from responsibility you can't outsource. Ruth wasn't with him. She didn't want to come, he said, sitting down. Said this was between us. I nodded. It is. He folded his hands, then unfolded them. I didn't know how much you were doing, he began. I mean, I knew, but not like this. I let the silence hold for a moment. I'd learned its value. What did you think would happen? I asked calmly, when you told me to serve your mother. He winced. I shouldn't have said it like that. No, I said. You shouldn't have thought it. He looked down. I grew up watching my mother do everything for my grandmother. I guess I thought, that's just how it works. That's how it worked for them, I replied. Not for me, not without my consent. He nodded slowly, like the idea was landing somewhere new. I opened my folder and slid the list across the table. These are my boundaries, I said. They're not punishments. They're conditions. He read silently. I watched his face change, line by line. Shared responsibility for caregiving. Professional help scheduled and paid for. No unilateral decisions about my time. No ultimatums. Counseling. Respectful language. And this I added, pointing to the last line. If I return, it will be because I choose to, not because I'm pressured. He looked up. You might not come back. I might not, I said honestly. He swallowed. I didn't realize I was risking everything. That's what ultimatums do, I said. They turn love into a transaction. We talked for over an hour, not arguing, talking, about money, about expectations, about the quiet ways resentment grows when it's fed daily. I showed him the bank statements, not as evidence of wrongdoing, but as proof of how invisible my contributions had become. "I thought the cash withdrawals were just household stuff," he said. "They were," I replied, "from me." He leaned back, rubbing his eyes. "The nurse said, we need a real care plan, not just patchwork." "I agree," I said, "and it won't be mine alone to manage." He nodded. "I've already arranged for in-home care 4 mornings a week, and adult day services twice a week once the paperwork clears." That surprised me, not because it was grand, but because it was practical. "I'm glad," I said, and I meant it. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. "Will you come home?" I met his eyes. "Not yet." That night, back at the motel, I sat on the bed and felt something unfamiliar: safety. Not certainty, safety. The kind that comes from knowing you won't betray yourself to keep the peace. 2 days later, I got a call from the home health aide. She'd been given my number in case. Ruth had refused her help at first, insisting I should be there. But by the second visit, she'd let the aide prepare lunch. "She misses you," the aide said gently, "but she's adjusting." I thanked her and hung up my chest tight with complicated feeling. Compassion didn't mean surrender. It meant choosing wisely. That weekend, Thomas asked if we could meet again, this time with a mediator. I agreed. Ruth came stiff and defensive, but she listened. When I spoke, I didn't accuse. I explained. "I'm not your servant," I said. "And I'm not your enemy. I'm your daughter-in-law, and I deserve respect." Ruth didn't apologize outright, but she said I didn't realize how much I asked of you. For her, that was something. After the meeting, Thomas walked me to my car. "I'm learning," he said quietly. "Late, but I'm learning." "So am I replied. That evening, I returned to the motel and packed a few things, not to move back, but to move forward. I'd found a small apartment available month to month near the park. Modest, affordable, mine. I signed the lease the next day. This wasn't revenge. It was education, earned the hard way. And it was teaching all of us something we should have known. Earlier love, without respect, is just obligation wearing a softer face. The mediator's office was smaller than I expected. 2 chairs, a round table, a box of tissues placed neatly in the center, like a quiet acknowledgement of what usually happened there. We sat facing one another, Thomas on one side, Ruth beside him, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I took the chair opposite them. No one spoke at first. The mediator, a woman in her early 60s, with kind eyes and a steady voice, introduced herself and explained the ground rules. Respectful language, no interruptions. Focus on solutions, not blame. I appreciated that. At our age, drama is exhausting. Clarity is a relief. Thomas spoke first. He admitted he'd handled things poorly. Not perfectly phrased apologies, real ones. He talked about being overwhelmed, about slipping into old patterns without questioning them. Ruth shifted beside him, her lips pressed thin. When it was my turn, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I want to be clear," I said. "I never refused to help. I refused to be erased." Ruth's eyes flicked toward me, startled. "I spent months adjusting my life. Without being asked, I continued. My days, my friendships, my health, all of it became secondary. When I was finally given a choice, it wasn't a choice at all. It was obedience or exile." The mediator nodded slowly. "And what do you need now?" I took a breath. Respect, shared responsibility, and the freedom to say yes or no without fear. Ruth cleared her throat. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said. I just expected what I was used to. I understand that, I replied, but expectations don't replace consent. Silence settled again, not heavy, thoughtful. We discussed practical matters next: care schedules, finances, communication. The mediator explained caregiver burnout in plain terms, the kind Ruth couldn't dismiss as modern nonsense. She talked about adult day programs, respite care, and how forcing family members often backfires. Ruth listened. She didn't like all of it, but she listened. At the end of the session, the mediator asked each of us to state one commitment moving forward. Thomas went first. I will never put my wife in a position where she has to choose between her dignity and her marriage. Ruth hesitated, then said, I will accept help that isn't just Eleanor. All eyes turned to me. I will not return to any situation where I'm expected to disappear, I said, but I'm open to rebuilding slowly. When we stood to leave, Ruth surprised me. She reached out and touched my arm briefly. I didn't know how tired you were, she said. I nodded. Neither did I until I stopped. That night, alone in my new apartment, I cooked myself a simple dinner and ate at my own table. The place was quiet, but it wasn't empty. It felt intentional. I realized then that reconciliation didn't have to mean moving backward. It could mean meeting somewhere new. The first weeks after the mediation felt like learning to walk again. Careful steps, steady pace, no rushing. I stayed in my apartment even when Thomas asked if I wanted to come home just for dinner. I told him, not yet. That answer didn't start a fight anymore. It simply existed. We began counseling the following Monday. A modest office near the hospital neutral walls, a therapist who spoke plainly and listened closely. She didn't take sides. She asked questions that sat with you long after the session ended. Why did the ultimatum feel necessary? She asked Thomas during our first meeting. He took a long breath. Because I was scared, and because I thought control would keep things from falling apart. And how did that work? She asked gently. He shook his head. It didn't. In those sessions, patterns surfaced how he'd learned to avoid conflict by deciding for others, how I'd learned to keep the peace by absorbing discomfort. Neither of us was painted as a villain. We were two older people confronting habits that had once felt like survival. Outside counseling, real changes were happening. The home health aide became a fixture in the house. Ruth attended adult day programs twice a week, at first reluctantly, then with a hint of interest. She came home talking about bingo and chair yoga, like they were discoveries. Thomas handled appointments, meals, medications. Not perfectly, but earnestly. One afternoon, he called me, not in panic, not in apology, just to tell me he'd cooked soup that didn't turn out right. She said it was bland, he said with a tired laugh. I smiled. Welcome to my world. There was a pause. Then I'm sorry, I didn't see it. That apology landed differently. It wasn't trying to pull me back. It was acknowledging the ground I stood on. I visited the house for the first time 3 weeks later. Not to move back, just to stop by. I arrived in the afternoon sunlight, slanting through the living room windows. Everything looked the same, and yet it didn't. The air felt less tight. Ruth was in her chair, a blanket over her knees. She looked up and said my name without accusation. You look well. I am, I said. We talked politely. About the weather, about a neighbor who'd moved. Ordinary conversation. When I stood to leave, she said, Thank you for coming. It wasn't an apology, but it was respect. That night, I returned to my apartment and slept deeply. I wasn't torn. I wasn't guilty. I was choosing. Over the next month, Thomas and I rebuilt slowly, deliberately. We scheduled time together that wasn't about caregiving or crisis. Coffee, walks, quiet dinners. He listened more. I spoke sooner. When something felt off, I said so. When something felt good, I didn't dismiss it. We also made practical agreements. Finances were reviewed openly. Care plans were written down. Expectations were named. The therapist called it putting guardrails on love. I liked that. One evening, Thomas asked, "Would you consider coming home part-time?" I thought about it. Not the house itself, but what it represented. I didn't feel pressure anymore. I felt choice. "I'll stay some nights," I said, "but I'm keeping my apartment." He nodded. "That's fair." Fair. Another word that hadn't lived in our marriage enough. The first night I stayed over, I slept in our bed and woke before dawn. I lay there, listening, not for tension, but for myself. I felt steady. When Ruth needed help later that morning, Thomas handled it. He didn't look to me. He didn't assume. At breakfast, Ruth said the aide will be here at 10. I nodded. No orders, no expectations. This was what repair looked like. Not grand gestures, but consistent respect. Not revenge, but responsibility shared. I realized then that leaving hadn't broken our marriage. It had revealed what needed fixing. And fixing it required something we'd both avoided for years: accountability. I didn't rush my decision. Even after I began staying at the house a few nights a week, I kept my apartment, not as an escape hatch, but as a reminder to myself and to Thomas that love works best when it's chosen freely. The house felt different now, quieter in a good way, not tense, not watchful. The care schedule was posted on the refrigerator. The aide came when she was supposed to. Ruth attended her programs and returned tired, but calmer, like someone who'd finally been allowed a life beyond the walls of one house. One afternoon, I found Ruth in the living room, sorting old photographs. She held one up, a picture of Thomas as a boy, standing between his parents at a county fair. "I was hard on him," she said suddenly, not looking at me. "I expected him to hold everything together." I sat down across from her. "He did his best," I said, "but no one can carry everything alone." She nodded slowly. "Neither can you." It wasn't a full apology, but it was understanding. And sometimes, at our age, that's the most honest thing a person can offer. As weeks turned into months, Thomas and I settled into something new. Not the old marriage we'd clung to out of habit, but a quieter partnership shaped by clearer lines. We checked in with each other. We talked before decisions were made. When caregiving needs changed, we adjusted the plan instead of assigning blame. One evening, as we washed dishes side by side, Thomas said, "I still think about that night. The ultimatum." "So do I said. "I didn't know I was asking you to disappear," he said softly, "but I was." I dried my hands and faced him. "What matters is that you see it now." He nodded, "and that you didn't disappear." I smiled. I didn't. I stepped aside so I could be seen again. That was the lesson I carried forward, not just in my marriage, but everywhere, at the library, at the senior center, with my children. I spoke sooner. I listened carefully. I didn't confuse peace with silence anymore. Eventually, I let go of the apartment, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I kept the key for a while, just in case. Then one day, I realized I hadn't thought about it in weeks. That's when I knew the choice had settled into something lasting. On a quiet Sunday afternoon, we sat together on the back porch, Thomas, Ruth, and me. The air smelled like cut grass in late summer. Ruth dozed in her chair. Thomas reached for my hand. "I'm glad you came back," he said. "So am I," I replied. "On my terms." He squeezed my hand gently. "Always." Looking back, I understand something I didn't then. Walking away wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of education. It taught Thomas that love doesn't survive on demands. It taught Ruth that care given freely is different from care taken for granted. And it taught me that dignity isn't loud, but it's powerful. If you're listening to this, and you've ever been given an ultimatum that cost you your self-respect, I want you to know something important. You're allowed to choose yourself without hating anyone. You're allowed to step back to breathe, to learn your rights, and to ask for respect at any age. Sometimes the quietest decision changes everything. If this story resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on your own boundaries, or share the story with someone who might need to hear it. And if you'd like to listen to more true-to-life stories about strength, dignity, and finding your voice later in life, I invite you to subscribe and join us again. Because it's never too late to be seen.